No action items.
Just educational.
Yes.
Here's
Hopefully from
the
you
attendance
to-
sheet.
From you to me.
Hmm?
Educational from you to me. They do both ways.
Well, I guess we could start, and then if a person shows up, we could call it to order.
So out in your agenda, you probably saw the list of our bicycle, what I call bicycle planning resources. Most of it's NPO bicycle planning work, except for the Ped Bike Issues Task Force report. But I thought it was kind of appropriate. I was just going to talk through and tell you very briefly some of the history of the documents. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about them. I have a few paper copies of some stuff if you want to look through anything. And then I really want to have a conversation with you, and I'm hoping you can answer these two questions for me at the end, not here, which is, what does the Transportation Commission need from the bikeway plan? And what should the bikeway plan include? And those may or may not be the same. So I kind of phrase them as two separate questions. We're in the process right now of just scoping the type and quantity and of work that we plan to do around the bikeway plan update. And we've already talked to the multimodal staff team. We've talked to the MPO Bicycle Advisory Committee. And I am going next week to the KU Bicycle Advisory Committee. Since it's kind of a coordinated effort of all of these different parties to find out some of these things, and I've asked them all basically the same questions is this. So think about, as I'm talking about what the different how the different plans function now, or what's happened with them, the stuff that we've done, how does maybe the Transportation Commission use that information, or what would be better, what would you rather have us had done in previous things to think about, or what other things, is there something the plans don't currently include or include that you don't like that we need to think about doing differently when we do our countywide bikeway plan. So we're in the process of updating the countywide bikeway plan that was finished in December of 2013. This was a process that we spent, we did a $200,000 multimodal studies package. This plan cost us about $100,000 that we consulted it out. The primary output and function of this plan, that as we see it being used, is really the resulting countywide bikeway map. And this map shows existing and future facilities. It's probably what you've seen the most of in terms of on your reports or information you're getting from engineers about whether or not something has a future facility designation. That's probably the most heavily used portion of this plan. Although it does have recommendations for all the 5 E's of bikeway planning, so not just engineering, but also education, encouragement, enforcement, and evaluation. There's varying degrees of implementation of some of the strategies recognized in that plan. So we'll just kind of leave that at that. I don't know how familiar you are with looking at it. I have a paper copy you can pass around, and it was also linked. It's all available online. And then, while this is not an MPO product, it was a local process. In bikeway planning history, the Ped Bike Issues Task Force report has recommendations for bicycle and pedestrian amenities and programs and projects. Some of them are consistent with the bikeway plan, some of them are not consistent with the bikeway plan. And let me show you as an example. Here, in the colors, you see the city-specific portion of the bikeway plan, which is the previous map, and then the dark blue, which is what the Ped Bike Issues Task Force called the priority network. The current bikeway plan didn't prioritize any of the network because there was never dedicated funding for bicycle infrastructure. So instead, it just said, here's future facility types. The Ped Bike Issues Task Force report said, here should be the priority network. And so that blue, you can see most parts of it overline existing bikeway network, although there are some parts where they've planned connections that there was nothing called for in the bikeway plan. So we know there's kind of these both plans have been approved or adopted regionally or city or regionally recognized, and so that's kind of what exists out there in terms of system planning for network-wise. In 2016, we received a competitive grant to conduct a bike share feasibility study, which determined bike share was feasible in the community. And as a result of that process, Donna, who serves among you and represents the university, is working on implementation of bike share. And it's very soon.
Very soon.
Like in the next month. So that happened as a result of this planning work that we started the process of conversation about bike share. And that kind of out of that study showed some recommendations about phasing and suggested amenities or locations and stuff. And we're taking the advisement of some of that as they work to implement it, although the implementation is not exactly what was recommended in the study,
Right.
mainly because of changing market conditions. The MPO, when we worked with the Lawrence Douglas County Bicycle Advisory Committee, conducted and updated the downtown bicycle parking inventory and made other efforts to install other bike corrals. You've heard about some of that conversation. As part of this work, we do twice annually bicycle parking audits to audit the capacity of the downtown bicycle parking and look at bicycle parking availability. So that's some other planning work we've done around bicycle parking. It also has requirements about recommendations to change code requirements for bicycle parking standards, to work to implement long-term bicycle parking like bicycle lockers and other considerations like that. We annually coordinate a campaign of volunteers to conduct manual bicycle and pedestrian counts, so going out and collecting usage information about different quadrants and streets in our community. So these are as a representative sample of our 6-7 years of counts, and the location kind of by what we projected of the daily volumes based on our count information. We recently coordinated a grant with 2 other MPOs to acquire bike ped counters, and we just got those recently, and we'll be working to validate some of these manual counts and projection process with some bike ped count, longer term bike ped count information. Multiple times now since late 90s, early 2000s, the city of Lawrence has been designated as a bicycle-friendly community at a bronze level. The 2 things I've included in the agenda is feedback that the League of American Bicyclists gave the city in relation to that application, which was done and compiled by the Bicycle Advisory Committee. So that'll be a conversation whose role it is to do that the next time that application becomes available and they need to reapply. The 2012 guidance, I think, is a little simpler to understand of what types of things they recommend you do in terms of improving your bicycle friendliness. The newer guidance, they changed their application process. So both of those were kind of included on your agenda packet in terms of, they're focused on infrastructure, they're focused on safest protected infrastructure, they're focused on education, the 5 E's again. So there's a variety of questions we fill out related to that. The application over time has gotten more stringent. So where they used to just say how many miles of bike lane do you have, now they say how many miles of 5-foot plus bike lane do you have. So like if you have facilities that are under the current standard, they don't allow you to count them as amenities. So that has become more stringent and hard to get bicycle friendliness. But those 2 guides are kind of what I provided you in terms of it shows how we rank on the different criteria they show and where they show communities who are getting a higher silver recognition rank. So that's kind of maybe something to look at in terms of where we stand and what they're looking at for different criteria for bicycle friendliness. And so that's kind of, if there's anything you want to talk about any of the plans, I really just wanted to have a discussion today to hopefully hear from you what you feel like the Transportation Commission needs out of a bikeway plan based on your experience so far and moving forward, and maybe what a bikeway plan out of the things we've kind of talked about you think we need to include. We envision this being a 12 to 18 month process to update the plan, and it will have a public engagement component. The Bicycle Advisory Committee, the MPO Bicycle Advisory Committee is will serve as it's the official steering committee of the plan update. So they currently serve as the advisory committee to the NPO staff on bicycle-related issues. They have representation, 2 city representation, 2 county appointees, which are City of Lawrence residents also. And then Lecompton, Eudora, Baldwin City all have positions on this for the countywide update. So that group is the formally recognized group that advises the NPO on bikeway needs, and so they'll be serving as the steering committee for this plan update. They have indicated they're interested in inviting someone to participate, not necessarily in a voting position, but to attend the meetings and be the representative liaison between them and Transportation Commission for the update process. And that's kind of the feedback they've given to us, so we'll be looking probably for you to appoint someone to serve kind of in that function.
How often is it updated?
How often is what?
The plan update?
Well, the previous plan was approved in December of 2013. The plan before that was a decade or more old. So
Okay.
this is the first time now that we're recognizing there's some conflicting and a bunch of different documents that we need to rectify the differences of in terms of planning. It's also the first opportunity we've really had in terms of, since there's been dedicated funding, to recognize there's probably a need to plan and update more often. So we've gotten in the process, now that we're in compliance with all of our NPO planning documents, that in a cycle of our long-range planning update, in the off years after we've just completed our Transportation 2040 update, that we will rotate through the cycle of updating the bikeway plan, the PED plan, our ITS plan, or other relevant planning studies that help feed into our long-range, more multimodal vision that the long-range plan serves.
So what interval are you looking for?
Probably 5 years. That would be a desire. So this meets that kind of time frame to think about the conversation about that plan update process. The committee kind of, and then we have to consider, when KU is not in session, how we coordinate with KU. Because KU also has a bikeway plan, although they have less network amenity stuff in there because they've really relied on our plan in terms of coordination. They have a few differences in their master plan to what we call for in this network, so those we can kind of rectify in this process, hopefully.
So the bike share, that'll be strictly KU? With the vendor?
The bike share, so the contract will be with KU, and we will start with locations on campus where we'll stage bicycles at existing racks. We're not going to change infrastructure right away or add permanent signage right away until we kind of see where people are using bikes. We will work with the city to figure out locations, if agreeable, to also stage bikes downtown or on rec paths or wherever it makes sense for the city of Lawrence.
So then is this, I'm trying to get it, so this is a strictly KU?
Anybody can ride these bikes. You can ride them hourly. You can have memberships. There are monthly memberships. There's a day pass. You do have to either have a credit card, or if you use cash, we'll have a couple of locations that will sell an RFID
So what's
card
the
that will
city putting
unlock
in?
it.
What's the city putting in there?
There's no cost to
There's no
bike
cost to
share.
any of us.
Okay.
It's a private venture.
Yeah.
And
So
they're
this,
coming in with a $0 there, so they're selling memberships
Okay.
and getting user fees.
yeah. Hopefully, if it's successful, then they'll expand the system, add more bikes next year. We shall see soon.
I've seen the bikes,
Yeah, they're going to be really
neat
cute.
looking bikes.
Yeah, I'm excited.
The plan that was done, you said in 2013, were there transportation commissioners that were on that task force? Seems like Aaron and Charlie. Anybody?
And that was for the multimodal studies. I think we had a steering committee, but it was primarily staff. The BAC at that time did appoint 2 members to serve on that steering committee. I want to say it was Lisa Hallberg and someone else.
I thought there was somebody on the traffic commission at the time.
Traffic safety, maybe.
At that time.
Yes.
It was appointed from our group.
Does it say in the?
I couldn't-
I can't remember. That's.
Mhm.
It's see if it says, it should say in the. I don't remember that. Yeah, so Charlie served on it as his function of the health department staff. Oh, Chris Berger was the BAC, other BAC, and Lisa Hallberg. Here's the membership of that. Ron May, too, from school.
What was the question again?
Who served on the committee, the steering committee for the previous plan update? The previous bikeway plan?
Well, I guess I'll jump in here. To be truthful, I don't know that I know enough about it to answer your questions,
Okay.
to be real honest about it. And I think as far as the experience that I've had in the last year or so with the Transportation Commission, I can see, and I know they're both related and connected, but one aspect of this would be looking at the bikeway plan itself, you know, and the other aspect would be the other decisions that we have to make, whatever they may be. How does the bikeway plan relate to those? And I think that over the last year, we've, you know, because some of us are pretty new, we've been kind of surprised every once in a while that somebody says, oh, well, the bike plan says, and it's like, gee, you know, that's a big deal, and we didn't know that. So I think our awareness, to the extent that you all can help us understand, you know, either directly or indirectly, how the bikeway plan may, you know, be considered in some of these other things we look at, be they traffic calming or stop signs or, you know, street improvements or whatever. You know, I know most of us probably know by now that 21st Street is being considered to be a boulevard. And so that really influences, obviously.
But that's out of the Ped Bike Issues Task Force report,
Yeah.
not even out of the bikeway plan. So,
Well, see,
so
yeah.
these are the kind of differences.
Yeah, and that's something that, you know, those two things just kind of bleed together for me,
Yeah.
honestly. And so I think we all kind of need some help how these things might influence some of the things we look at.
So I have a list of all the things that other people have told us. Would you like to see
Yeah.
those things?
Well, I want to see if anybody else has any
Okay, yeah,
thoughts
please
before.
comment first, because I don't want
you
us to
know.
do the conversation.
Yeah, I don't want to just say, I don't know, so
Okay,
forget about it.
sure.
Do you guys have anything to offer to this?
Go ahead.
I don't want to, this is the, from our conversations with the MPO Bicycle Advisory Committee and the staff, and these are not organized from one committee or the other, and I'll just walk through these of what those groups have talked about basically in terms of saying what the bikeway plan should be or do.
Mhm.
So, first off, they said it needs to rectify or incorporate the Ped Bike Issues Task Force report. Okay, so that's
Yeah,
probably same for prioritization too, although they did also say that regardless of whatever, there's a lot of recommendations in that, so we should prioritize which ones are most important for implementation, thinking about that. That the bikeway plan needs to have additional design options, and so if you think about now, the bikeway network plan calls for bike lanes, bike routes, shared use path. But there's a lot of other design options in terms of, for example, bike boulevards, and even though it recognizes NACDO should be used, and the city of Lawrence has NACDO as an acceptable design guide, that there needs to be additional design options in the plan network or considerations. So based on that, there should be some sort of criteria, basically, like for the street, whether that be classification, speed, volume, warrants for removing parking, wind-angled parking, and how those interactions, basically criteria for what bikeway type is used based on different safety or existing conditions or future conditions criteria, like what's appropriate where. They felt like responsibility should be assigned to the recommendations, so instead of making blanket recommendations, it should be the city needs to do this, KU should do this, like who's responsible for what, and this gets back to kind of this idea about implementation, right? What you can implement. We talked about that 5-year focus and considerations of how that plays into the city-specific CIP process. and some of the conversations you've had probably about prioritization. It said it should enforce or review what bicycle-friendly community has told us in an effort to meet the goals and targets for bicycle-friendly community. It should consider short-term versus long-term, so now that it has prioritization, but are some of these goals really short-term goals, or are they long-term goals, or is it a short-term, should really be something we explore in the next 5 years, or something in the long term we need to do? It should have a conversation about maintenance, that once we build these facilities, that's not the end of the story. So talking about maintenance, whether that be like temporary so people can use it, whether that be snow or sand for use, but also maintaining facilities in terms of the cost of maintaining infrastructure. They felt like there should be a public engagement process, buy-in process with not only meetings, but rides, where we go ride the networks. And that how we can use the public engagement process as a tool for education as part of the planning process. So whether that be how to ride safely, education just about bikeway types, so that there needed to be some sort of, you've got to bring people along for the ride. And then performance. So how are we incorporating and considering the relationship between the long-range plan performance measures, but also tracking and evaluating the plan and its ability to implement the plan. So.
Those are,
Honestly, we got the first thing, an annual report, just a statement of the organization. Because there's a whole bunch of, there's a task force, there's this group here, there's this group here. It's just kind of, would be nice as a statement of
Like an
what
org
the
chart.
relationships are. Yeah, because you have a planning organization, you know, at the Douglas County Influence Planning Organization.
Right.
Doing plan, but the issues of maintenance and construction are gonna fall
Right.
on the cities. I think it'd just be more explicit on what, you know, what the organization is, that way people know where they need to make their input.
You don't expect us to read that, do you?
But then things like maintenance fall out, because you can see, okay, so even something simple as who's gonna restripe those lanes? Who does that fall on?
Sure. In terms of responsibilities.
Because people can come, and they can come to the planning commission, put this in there, but then the operational stuff ends up,
Right.
you know,
Right.
they.
I think some of these seem to be pretty big picture, broad categories.
Yeah, this is like real high
The
level.
one
so-
that, the one that jumps out to me is short-term versus long-term
Okay.
in terms of implementation. You start thinking so broadly when you meet once or twice a month. It's kind of hard to get your arms around it, but, you know, prioritization and, you know, some idea of short-term, long-term,
That would be
doable things makes sense to me.
okay.
Could I ask a question, Jessica? In the last 5 years, how would you describe how this plan has been used by various parts of the city or KU or whatever? I mean, has it been referred to and like, okay, well, the bike plan says this, so,
So I would say the most use out of it literally is the system map, where in the development planning process, whether that be public or private, that literally, you're looking at the map to say, what's this future facility? So whether that be, we're talking about street maintenance, and they say, what's the future facility based on the level of work we're doing and how much can we work to implement? Or the example of like when a private developer has come in to say, oh, the future bikeway plan calls for this, you build that. Menards is a good example. In the last 5 years, their site showed the shared use path connection through the site. It was built as part of that private development. So that is codified too, in the sense that that's required in the code. And so that's probably the biggest value I've seen of the plan. Although there have been other things like this plan recommends us exploring bike share, which in the end we did a separate study and have done. So there's some other things like education and encouragement, other things related to education and encouragement have happened, but I don't know that it's directly related to because the plan says it. Sometimes they use that to justify stuff later, but I don't know that it's directly, hey, we're working to implement the bike plan. I mean, the health department did their Safe Routes to School planning process, which was a partnership of all the organizations, and some of the things that are probably consistent with education and encouragement related to the bikeway plan happened as part of that process, but is it attributable to this?
Yeah, I would say, Steve, from our perspective, the plan's important because whenever we do, like Jessica said, any project, whether it's an infrastructure reconstruction project or just our annual maintenance project, that's when we point to the bikeway plan and say, well, if this is a bike route and it's not marked with sharrows, it's been our practice to go in and put bike marking sharrows when we redo the pavement, redo the mill and overlay or whatever pavement restoration that we're doing. We go in and put in those pavement markings with the project because it's on the map. But I think when we look at the feasibility of the network and how we're making connections from the bike lanes to shared use paths, that's important too, that we need to look at with this next plan, because we had this conversation on Castle where north of Bob Billings, was on the plan for bike lanes. Well, we have a shared use path all the way to the south, and we ended up doing both on that project. But I don't know if the last plan really considered how the different facility types tie together, and so I think that's something that we need to look at with this next plan. But when we do any type of project, we usually start with this plan, say, well, we're reconstructing 6th and Iowa, it's on the plan for a shared use path, let's find room for it on that segment, as an example. So it's really important for us in Public Works to have the plan that we can point to. And another example would be KDOT projects. When KDOT and the city partnered in with the SLT project to do 31st Street, it was in our plan to have a shared use path along 31st Street. So we could say, hey, KDOT, we have this in our plan, please put it in your plans to put in the shared use path along 31st Street or any of the other streets that we did with that project.
They look at that when they look at like transportation alternative applications. It must be consistent with your regionally approved plan. So they would say, is it consistent with your MPO plan? So county and other cities have used it in other similar ways to what David describes, but the city of Lawrence is probably the primary beneficiary of this planning process.
I guess the opposite question would be, what projects didn't respect the plan? Can you think of any and why?
Well, 9th Street is one of them, but we're designing without any bike facilities. Our recommendation was to do bike lanes. Of course, that's a very unique project because there's a lot of other factors in play with the design of 9th Street.
Are you talking about
East 9th? East of downtown.
Oh, east of downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that didn't follow the bikeway plan because it had future bike lanes.
There's other examples like Bob Billings where when you redid that roadway, you had the scope to add sidewalk, but you didn't have the scope to add shared use path. So that was something where it wasn't compliant with the plan because the scope of the project you couldn't fit it in the budget. It was a scoping issue.
Yeah, and it wasn't a reconstruction project.
Yes,
but
yeah.
Could it have been added later?
Yeah.
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Put a road.
Yeah, you could still implement that. Yeah.
Yeah, we expect to on that particular project, Bob Billings, we expect to reconstruct that in the next 10 years, and that would include the bike facility.
There's another example when the one-way section of Vermont
Mhm.
Street was getting ready to be milled and overlaid. The plan calls for a one-way bike lane on that street. It required removing parking, and that was not implemented
Which
when
one
that
was that?
road was done. Vermont from 6th to 7th Street. So the current plan calls for a one-way bike lane on that section. There's been other considerations too of where when development has happened, angled parking has been put in on streets that are bike routes. And that's pretty dangerous for bicycling. It's the reason why we don't have Mass Street as a bike facility, and that's why we use Vermont and New Hampshire. And recent development projects on New Hampshire Street have put angled parking on New Hampshire Street. So that's things like that are a consideration. I think that what this group was thinking about what are the considerations for having parking, removing parking warrants or angled parking on streets. There's been other streets where when you go and have done mill and overlays, you could have restriped and add bike lanes, but it would have required removing parking, and that has not been chosen to be pursued.
Yeah, I think that's another good point. I think parking, some of these streets, and one that I was thinking about when the city staff did, with our multimodal team, did a bike tour, was on 11th Street between Haskell and, Connecticut or downtown, is wide enough to go in and stripe bike lanes, and it's on our plan for bike lanes, but you would need to remove parking. And although I very rarely, if ever, see anyone parked on 11th Street, it
Events,
it would require removing the parking, and from past experience, it's been a challenge to overcome whether or not people park there or not. Removing parking is a sensitive issue. I think that would be another thing that I think staff sees the need from this bikeway plan to identify those opportunities where, for instance, like 11th Street, where you have the width of the street, it's wide enough to accommodate vehicle lanes and stripe bike lanes at a low cost option without doing a major project, and that provides some more bike facilities and connections on the network. So I think that would be one of the key things too to look at when it comes to parking.
What did the 2013 study say about protected bike lanes?
It recognized them as a facility type in the list of kind of facilities, but it really only calls for a protected cycle track in one spot. So it really didn't explore many. The study was scoped mainly to look at some specific areas in the city with recommended changes to those, and then expand it to the county. So the scope of the project wasn't necessarily go reinvestigate every single segment you have in the urban bikeway network as part of this study. So part of it, the part where around the loop section now that we've restudied, was one of the things that was studied in this, and it had a separate alignment option with an on-street option that had a protected cycle track for part of it.
Where was that?
Around this curve, right out here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
From Mass around to New Hampshire?
Yeah. I mean, it transitioned to this sidewalk out here for part of it. But other than that, the plan doesn't call for many new facility types. So like even the conversation about bike boulevards and the conversation the Ped Bike Issues Task Force had around bike boulevards, this plan under bike lanes or shared use path really only calls for bike routes. Well, a bike boulevard could be a bike route, but a bike route literally in this plan sense only means signed street. It has no other criteria besides being a signed street.
Do you think that if you're looking at updating, well, two questions. Did it, and if you're looking at updating, would your attitude be, would you be influenced by budget, by what's realistic as you go? Or would you say, I'm going to go for the moon here. I'm going to say, gee, let's go for protected lanes wherever we think we need them. And we may in the back of our mind say, well, it's not going to be affordable.
I think that's a conversation the process has to that has to happen during the process.
Yeah.
It's a conversation that has to happen with the public. It's also a conversation that the MPOBAC and the people who participate in that conversation are going to need to have as we shape what a future network looks like.
Yeah, I still go back to the, I think it's our responsibility to look way down the road. Not just the next 2 or 3 years, but, 50 years. I don't think, I'm not kidding when I say that, and
So, well, part of the issue too is if we get into a cycle where we're starting to have that conversation, and we've really said in that process that we envision this being a 5-year process, now this idea of short versus long has more meaning, because where short is really what are you doing between now and the next plan update, not what are you doing now that you've approved the plan and it sits on the shelf to maybe be adopted. And part of that comes with the idea that there's money to implement stuff, and that's the change in the conversation. I think that impacts how you can talk about short term, because you're planning a next cycle. As of now, when we did this one in 2013, I think it's good practice to say, yes, we plan to update the plan when it becomes necessary, right? But if we're going into this saying, we really envision this being a 5-year cycle, we can think about how we plan it differently than if it's just, this is our plan until another plan is adopted. And hopefully that's better.
just seemed like the network should be the priority, obviously, self-evident. And
It has to be network based.
Yeah.
The plan has to be network based.
What would be fun to be on that task force? That's
Yeah.
one way for somebody to get, deeper into this than maybe
Wait, are you
once a month.
volunteering?
I might, actually. I think I'd be really interested, but,
Sure.
when are you gonna be making those decisions?
So I would assume we'll bring that back to a future transportation commission meeting.
Well, there may be.
I haven't made the formal request to put it on the
There may be
agenda, it's
more
on
than
the
one
list, but
person,
it could be more than one person, and of course, those are open meetings, so anybody's invited.
Sure.
There are also, we really had a conversation with the NPO-BAC members, this idea about how do you engage people in the process of planning this in terms of not just where do you want routes and what type of routes, but talking about what type of riders ride on different facility types in terms of user comfort. Also, maybe some visual preference surveying to let people see what different things look like and look at what, like visual, doing some different options that we haven't necessarily done for planning process and engagement, but also just riding, going on rides, like riding every section of different routes and streets that we're proposing to be part of the network to understand not only existing conditions, but context of connectivity.
It seems like the bike share program could really influence a culture shift pretty strongly, and just getting people use, these big, are they yellow? Or
They're gonna be red and blue and red predominantly.
They're-
yeah.
Oh, so they're different.
There'll
than
be a
the
little
one
Jayhawk base. Yeah, the yellow one we had was just a
That
sample.
was just an example, but, just to see these visually, they're gonna be jumping out. What are there, 180 of them going around town? That's
We're
gonna
gonna-
be,
We're gonna try to have a bunch of people ride them in the Earth Day parade.
oh,
So if you wanna volunteer, we're looking for bodies.
Yeah, I think those are all parts of the conversation we need to have about the shift in culture, because I think when you look at the bicycle friendliness, those conversations, part of what it is how much infrastructure do you have and what type of infrastructure are you building. That's part of the conversation. That's the really kind of the old school way of thinking about biking. The new school way of thinking about biking is, what are you doing to encourage it, to educate people about not only people who ride, but people who don't ride, about how to use the road in a safe way together and what types of things to do. So I think there's a changing tone nationally too about thinking about bike culture as part of your bikeway planning effort, and how do you use the planning process to benefit that.
what did Aaron quoted a stat, he said 10% of the people in a city, I'm winging it here, 10% of the people in the city use bikes in a way to get around, and, seriously, if they were more comfortable, it'd be like 50.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I'm saying that
Yeah, it's-
right, but
I mean,
but
yeah.
it's pretty incredible.
Interested but concerned, yeah.
I would ride if I didn't have Nasmith to continue.
Yeah, really. And I know for me, for, a senior person, if I had a protected path, you've heard me say this over and over again, to get around the network, I'm fine going through the neighborhoods. I can deal with that, but, getting the main network, it would open it up for people like me that have the time.
And there's also, one of the things I would say is there's a planned April commuter class through the Lawrence Parks and Recreation, the League of American Cycling Instructors that we have teach a bicycle commuter class. They're hosting it April 17th and 19th, and the 21st. It's like 3 different sessions, and they have a minimum attendance of 3. They have 2 right now, so they're looking for people interested in signing up. It's in the Parks and Rec guide, and if you want more information about that, that might also be a very valuable experience for you to have to see what is being taught in terms of cycling education in our community.
Oh, yeah, really. What were those dates again?
17th, 19th, and 21st. I will get Stephen Mason. He's the programmer at Parks and Rec, who he operates out of East Lawrence Rec Center, but he just sent me that the other day in relation to something else I asked him, so. But. So our plan basically from this conversation is to draft what we would call a scope of work. That'll just kind of be the agreement between our parties. We'll share with the steering committee. We'll put a timeline together and some plans with them and take it through our process to kind of get approved. So that's something we can share back out with you, and you can give comments to us directly as we go through this process. We just want to, I can't guarantee we're going to do as much as we can in that process, but part of the process will also take us where we need to go in terms of talking about the scope for the plan. So.
All right. Is there anything else? Anything else on the plan, Jessica? No? All right, well, I wanted to go over some information that we have for our bikeway projects and some costs. So at the April meeting, I guess it's April 2nd we have a meeting next Thursday for 19th Street, but April 2nd is the next regular meeting. One of the things we're planning to discuss is the bike ped projects and priority. So we have done some very preliminary cost estimates for different segments of bike facilities on our planned network. Let's see here. And so at our meeting in April, we're going to try to get feedback from you on what the priorities for bike ped funding is. So we have $350,000 that you directed us. I think it was in the February meeting, the split of the share of funds for 17 and 18 to spend on bikeway projects. It was $350,000. So based off of our priority criteria, we are working on putting some cost estimates to bike facilities and pedestrian facilities, which is going to take some time, but we wanted to, and as we continue to work through the long list of all those projects, we did start looking at the top projects in some of these different categories. So on the sheet that I handed out, if you look at the first 4 projects are shared use path projects, which based off of our policy had the highest score. So really, if you look at those first 4 projects, that's a shared use path on 6th Street from Monterey Way all the way to Wisconsin in 4 different segments.
You have the right way for that one?
We don't. So this cost estimate includes right-of-way acquisition. It's just a ballpark planning cost estimate for decision-making purposes. So Amanda's gone through on some of these high-scoring projects based off the policy to put some estimates to them so that we could present you some options in April to proceed with with completing this project. So we felt it'd be good to get this out and get any feedback you have on, or any more information you want to see before we have that meeting in April. So we've put a few cost estimates to those segments on 6th Street. Right now, we have a shared use path on 6th Street way out west that goes all the way to Monterey Way. So this would essentially complete that. Those 4 segments would get you down to Wisconsin. Now, again, we only have $350,000 next year, but so there's some decisions to make on whether or not you do one segment of those of 6th Street versus doing some other facility types. So we've shown some estimates there for 6th Street on shared use path. If you go down in the notes segment, there are some of these projects are already planned in the CIP or through other projects. For instance, if you go down to the 13th Street project, the Bike Boulevard, that is already proposed with our 2018 traffic calming projects that we talked about last month. And so obviously we wouldn't proceed with the bike ped money if we're already planning it with another project or a CIP project. So if you go down to, I think I would kind of go over 3 different things. I talked about the shared use paths on the 6th Street. Those are the highest priority for shared use paths. The bike boulevards, about the 6th project down in Wisconsin, 21st Street, Iowa to Nasmith, and 21st Nasmith to Mass. We put together some, again, just preliminary planning estimates for bike boulevards, and what we did on that was just assumed a cost of $35 a linear foot to install traffic calming, signage, pavement marking, to create bike boulevards on those streets. And so that's how we came up with that estimate for the bike boulevards. And if you go down a little farther to the shared use paths for the Lawrence Loop, we've put together some numbers on the cost estimates, which I think were used from that study that we just completed on the Lawrence Loop study, and that's where those estimates come from. So, what we're trying to do in April is to get some feedback on how to spend this money. Obviously, if we just go off the highest scored project, it's that 6th Street, Iowa to Wisconsin. But again, there's other factors that you may want to consider as far as, bang for your buck and what we can do. So, wanted to give this to you ahead of time, get any feedback you may have and other information you want to see. We're not going to be able to put cost estimates to every single segment of bike facility that is in the plan, but we did want to find the higher scoring areas and what we felt would be good candidates for decision making for this money. So if you got any questions now, I'd be happy to try to answer them, or if you want to look it over and think about it and give us some feedback before the meeting, we'd appreciate it. But again, this will be on the agenda, I think, on April the 2nd, and we're also working on the pedestrian estimates as well for that money. What was the
safety? Daily traffic factor
Volume.
Yeah.
of the adjacent road.
Mm-hmm.
You can do 13th in your traffic calming budget?
Yeah, that was one of the projects that we recommended and talked about at our meeting in March, and so we're anticipating to turn that into a bike boulevard with the traffic calming project money.
KU's doing Nasmith.
The Nasmith project, 18th to 23rd, is in the CIP for
Actually
20.
met Nasmith on KU campus.
Nasmith on KU campus.
KU in the notes.
Yeah, that segment is a KU street, so
Well, it's part of the plan, it probably doesn't come out of city money.
Right, no, I get
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so
The
that's why.
question is KU doing it, or it's
No,
the responsibility's theirs?
Yeah, it's not, I don't have any knowledge of them doing that,
Okay.
that at this time, so.
So is that Sunnyside, 19? Is that what that's referring to?
Yes. It would probably be Sunnyside to 18th, the city's, yeah, after, south of 18th is city.
Well, gee, if you've got 350,000, why wouldn't you do 2 or 3 smaller projects? I mean, you can't, you know, 6th Street even, this is where, you know, the prioritization policy, you don't just say, oh, it's got 15, so we've got to do that. I mean, that's a guide.
Yeah.
If you had $1 million, then we'd have a different conversation. But I'm gonna go pretty quick. I don't know why we even do one up to 6th Street. Maybe I'm biased here, you know, with my own personal views, but why wouldn't you look at, you know, the bike boulevards?
The 221st Street.
Yeah,
Well, that would be nice, and would fit into the tunnels going there.
Well, tunnels will be at 19th in Iowa,
Right.
and we are doing the bike lanes and shared use path with that project this summer.
Well, that's what I mean, then you could,
But
once you've got the crossing for Iowa, then you can then shoot down to 21st.
yeah, we could do that. So anyway, this is the at least as far as the end of last week, numbers we put together. I just wanted to get you thinking about these things ahead of the April meeting. So we'll get this out to the rest in the group and plan on talking about it at the April agenda meeting.
okay, just go over one more time for me. This would go into next year's budget.
No, this would be for 2018. It's 20. There's some remaining money for 2017
Okay.
and
So
in
these
2018. So there was $450,000 in 2018 for bike pad. And there was 150 left over from 17. We set aside 300,000 for that tunnel project and 100 for the safe routes to school. So there's 150 in 17. 450 in 18, so there's 600,000, and then in February we discussed breaking out to do 100,000 in ADA ramps, 150 in pedestrian facilities, and then 350 in bikes. So our hope would be to get some direction in April on what to do, and then be able to design and construct later this year. We can get going on it.
So this would be a recommendation to the city commission.
Yes.
Well, let's decide now so we can watch. the
I know,
basketball
that's
game.
right.
Well, that is all I had, so if there's nothing else, we didn't have an official meeting because we didn't have a quorum, but appreciate you guys coming today, and if you got any other questions for us, let us know. So we're meeting next Thursday, 6 p.m. to discuss the 19th Street project. I'll try to get some information out, I'll post on that by the end of the week. And then the next regular meeting is April the 2nd. So. Thanks.
Okay.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Mhm.